Hello, welcome back to the Fashion Nap. I had to get serious today because I am interviewing the invisible face of fashion. Somebody who you are very familiar with, you just don't know you're familiar with them. One of the women that Andre Leon Talley credits as making him a global celebrity. The woman that Kristen McMenamy said made her a star. The woman that gave a platform to models to become supermodels. I am speaking to Nan Devitt Tremblay, all about being the voice of fashion TV. Being a Canadian on Paris, and how she balanced being a mum of toddlers with carrying the fashion industry on her back. Nan flies back to Canada tomorrow, so I'm so grateful that she's going to sit down with me today and tell us everything about fashion TV, how it came to be, and its lasting legacy. Without further ado, let's start this interview. But first, here's the trailer for Nan's film, Carton D'Invitation.
I was a mom living in Paris. I got lots of invitations. People talked to me, and here's what they said.
It's a circus, a zoo. Everyone's an animal. Up.
A weird atmosphere altogether, I think. A weird vibe with the contact lenses. I'm sure I'm freaking you out now.
I like things extreme, you know. I like sweet and soft, and I like mean and wild.
On me, I cap that, I am like a sponge, you know, like that, and I take like that, and after it's come like that. That's all.
I think that there's some glamour missing in Hollywood, and at least we're glamorous. We make an effort when we go out. We don't dress down. We dress up.
I thought it was more Balenciaga than Balenciaga and more Dior than Dior.
If the world is not ready for this, we're at the end of the world.
You have to have a curiosity, and you have to like what you're doing. Of course, I love Paris. It's wonderful. It's the mecca of style. It's the center of the universe for fashion, so I couldn't be in a better place.
So I'm sitting here with someone that you definitely know, whether you know it or not. I'm here with Nan Devitt Tremblay. Hi.
Hi.
I am bursting with questions for you. We've been chatting a bit beforehand, and I've been trying to keep all the questions in for the recording because this woman has seen it all. Like, you really have seen it all in fashion.
I've seen a lot.
You started doing the fashion television, was it
1986.
86? Okay.
1986 till 1998.
Because in your documentary, it was a clip in 97 and you confessed that you only started reading magazines the year before. Did you have any interest in fashion beforehand? Or
Not much.
Not much. So you just kind of fell into this position. And it kind of reminds me of, you know, in the movie The Devil Wears Prada, when it's like everyone wants to be us. And it's just like some person that doesn't really care about all of the politics and hierarchy in this dream role.
It was a funny thing to do.
Do you think your, not lack of interest, but just kind of newness to the fashion made you better at your job? Because you weren't so intimidated by who all these people were.
For sure. Not to sound arrogant, but for one thing, I never gushed. I respected everybody, but I never gushed. The only gush I did was I gushed when I met Nina Simone. Well, who wouldn't? I was just like, oh, I'm so happy to meet you. But otherwise, you know, they were just human beings. And the fact that just fashion television, the program that I worked for, our whole approach was, I suppose, more documentary in some kind of way. You'd use that word nowadays. Because we didn't care, kind of collectively, we didn't really care about trends or styles, or we never, I never did a story about a hemline or even what was in, you know, but we were interested in the people and reflecting what was happening kind of sociologically, I guess. Yeah. And that probably, that distance probably made me less of a fan and more of just somebody who could be natural with people.
Yeah, because I feel like I would have just freaked out if I was in your position and got no work done. I'd be like, oh my God, Linda!
Nah, they're just humans, you know.
It's true. It's very true. So it was almost the first time fashion had been put in people's homes in that way. Normally fashion shows at that point, it was like an exclusive club. You'd get invited, you go and see it. It was a completely new thing. Yeah. A few people throughout the documentary sort of credited you as making them famous. Could we talk a bit about the model to supermodel television pipeline?
I mean, there was fashion on television, almost none. But people would do reports on French TV during the Fashion Week, just a little brief thing, or Elsa Clinch from CNN would do something, and that was quite formal. The channel that I worked for was a very new channel and very edgy, and had this whole fly on the wall. They didn't have a lot of money. They were just doing everything ad hoc and gonzo journalism. And so I took that gonzo style and applied it to what I was doing in Paris. And that was very new, because that world was so elite and so exclusive and so closed. And suddenly it was in people's living rooms, and in this way that felt very authentic, and like you were right there. It wasn't intentional, but it was at that time, quite groundbreaking in retrospect. The supermodels, well, we certainly didn't create the supermodels. That was a whole big soup, of chemical effects that happened. But we were certainly part of it, because at that time, models, their names weren't even put in magazines, right? You didn't know who they were. You might, for the general public. And the fact that the show was going out every week all over the world, 125 countries, their names, the young women were being captioned. They were being asked for their opinions about the show. They were acting as a free PR for the designers in many cases. They became really great spokespeople with no PR training, young women. And sometimes they'd be there with their mother, or they just talk about, what was happening with their life and their feelings. And that was really quite engaging, and people took to it. They were gaining traction, and we helped put the super in the supermodels, is kind of how I like to think about it. Kristen McMenamy said I made her famous, but she would always tell me that, but she was getting there on her own, as if she wasn't going to be famous. But I did a very early feature about her.
Yeah, she's a star, of course. She has that quality about her, but she has such a wild personality that I guess we wouldn't have seen if she wasn't on TV all the time.
She was great. But a lot of the clips from the documentary, I interviewed her all the time for years and years, but a lot of the clips in the documentary that act as a kind of leitmotif come from a 4 or 5 minute piece that I did really early in her career. And that, that kind of established a bit of an identity for her. And I just think she was wonderful, because she would say what she was thinking, and other people might be more careful. And that authenticity just touched me.
But it wasn't just her that said that, you contributed to their stardom, because Andre Leon Talley also gave a lot of props to you.
He would tell me that, he'd be in Ohio and somebody would recognize him. And it was because the program ended up on VH1 in America. So, he became recognizable around the world. I mean, again, he would have, but it's different. It comes through the magazines and the people who are in the know, whereas this was just the general public. He became somebody that people recognized. And he was a very regular fixture. He probably was on every episode of the show. Yeah. You want me to tell you the wildest thing I did with Andre?
No. Of course, yeah.
But I don't know what he was thinking or what we were thinking, but one time he summoned me to Charles de Gaulle Airport. He said, I'm getting off the plane and you need to film. I don't know how my boss authorized that, but we took a crew and we met his plane for arriving from St. Petersburg, and he had a full suite of Louis Vuitton luggage that he wanted us to film, and some kind of fur whole situation he was wearing, and he was with some princess, I can't remember her name, and they'd been renovating her castle or something in St. Petersburg. And I can't imagine we ever found any place to put that, but we filmed it. It's lost in the archives somewhere, but yeah, that's
I would love
the wildest
to see that
thing I did.
Because I have an image of it in my head, and I feel like knowing, or not knowing, but with Andre, I'm sure the image is exactly what I'm seeing in my head. Because he has such a strong, recognizable look that you just know, the fur tick, the Louis Vuitton luggage tick.
You knew.
He just wanted to make an entrance.
And that was before that was a part of his public persona. I guess it was the early development of it, because it would have been like 97 or something.
In a way, he was building his brand just the same as everybody else. So the way people pull stunts now and posting on social media, him calling fashion television to come and film him getting off a plane is the equivalent of posting an Instagram story, I guess. So
that's brilliant. You interact with fashion and media in a whole new way, and in creative new ways. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same but different.
Yeah.
Same but different. Something that was like a small comment that you made in the documentary that I was really interested in, and I'm hoping that it's not scandalous with your face. I don't think it is. But I
snuck a lot of things in small comments.
But you mentioned something about designers started to scale back their shows for TV. and
Oh,
and the
yes.
television kind of started to influence how people will present their clothes. What did you mean by that?
Because my film is archival, I didn't include the interviews that I was doing in terms of my research. But while I was researching, I reconnected with Eric Wright, who was Karl Lagerfeld's assistant for 23 years. And since Eric and I have spoken a lot, and it's a very profound person, really special, was like the insider's insider, brilliant, brilliant right-hand person to Karl Lagerfeld. And he did everything with him in the photos and the styling and designing, whatever. And it's Eric who told me that, Karl got into photography and they were doing all these photo shoots. And at a certain point, between the two of them, they just started to take off the bits and pieces for the photos. And they started to think about how the lens was portraying things. And their attitude was, in the showroom, all of those things will be there. All the accessories will be there. The buyers will come and they will see everything. But they were thinking more about all those cameras, because as the years went along, there were more and more cameras at the end of the runway and down the sides of the runway, hundreds of them, and thinking more about what that lens was capturing as opposed to what the buyers were sitting there with their notebooks. I want to buy this. I want to buy that. They just pitched the show in a different way. Yeah, so they streamlined what was in Karl's case. I can't speak for the others.
It's very interesting,
Yeah,
though.
it is.
I really wanted to know more about that when I got to that part.
To consider the lens as a factor in how you produced a show. It's interesting.
Well, yeah, it had never been done before, and it was going from one type of production to like a large scale production, like you're saying, of a whole camera crew. I guess it would change things.
Yeah, well, if you think about those Chanel shows in the 80s and early 90s, just like there's so much stuff. They're just like working a lot of different things.
And I love
purses and keys and hats and feathers, and I know I love it too.
You actually got one of very few clips, and I know because I've tried to find them, of Stephen Meisel talking.
Oh yeah,
how you did, and that's a big deal, first of all.
Yeah.
But how was that day on set with just a casual day at the office with Linda Evangelista and Stephen Meisel? How was the experience?
It was interesting. It was fluky. It was a whole day that we'd spent with Linda. We were doing a whole feature. I refound it, accessed that archive with great pleasure, and to remember all of it. And it keeps turning up in other documentaries and the supermodel series. So she's wearing that red suit, and she's quite fabulous. And we went from one place to another, and we were kibitzing with Karl Lagerfeld backstage. And we were just having a relaxed, long day. And she's Canadian, and fashion television was Canadian, so we were doing the consecration of Linda's story, and she was being a good sport about having us along. And somebody along, I guess it was Stephen, wanted her to bleach her hair. And so that was going to be the day she was going to bleach her hair. So, we'll hang around. So she went to the hairdresser. She said, "You can't film me when I'm having the hair done." So we stood outside the hairdressers, and it was dark. I was late for the babysitter, but thought, okay, we'll just keep going here. And she said, "I'll just tell Stephen he has to let you in." We're like, okay, we'll see how that goes. I don't know, 7:30 at night or whatever she comes. She's got some blonde. The next morning she went completely blonde, but she got some blonde hair, and we're outside the studio, and she goes in, and she's basically told Stephen he had to let us in. And it was Anna Sui was the stylist that day. I know. And, I just kind of rolled with it. I didn't realize that I was getting one of the few interviews people would get with him. I was just going with the flow of the day. And he chatted with us. There's a bit of it in the documentary, but there was a bit more. But he's, a person who was very reticent to be this, have the attention paid, and still behind the glasses with the hat on, and
because he had a very different way of working to other photographers as well. So it must have been quite an experience to witness a bit of that. I don't know if you went on set with many other photographers.
Lots and lots.
I thought you might have said that.
Yeah, and I'm finding more and more of that archive, and it's amazing. Yeah,
it is just incredible.
Yeah.
But you mentioned you were, having this fabulous day with Linda Evangelista, Stephen Meisel, waiting for the hair to be done, but you've also got a babysitter.
That's right.
How did you deal with like the inevitable mum guilt?
Yeah, well,
because fashion hours are round the clock.
But luckily, it was more intense during periods of shows. Probably the same with you, right? It's like then you just, all bets are off when the shows are on, and I could balance it the rest of the year. It was interesting trying to go between the two worlds, but I think it also grounded me. And probably you sense that too, right? You just get you right back to reality. And in my documentary, I include some of the small clips of the balancing our children's life and my life in fashion. And I say, I didn't find one world more glamorous or more beautiful or more wacky, because both worlds were wacky, than the other. It was, for me, it was kind of an equal thing, and it was really fun. I mean, it was always, particularly when I had 3 children as I went along, but I remember the first child, it was harder and harder it was hard to be brave and leave the baby with the babysitter. And I remember the first July shows, couture, after my son was born in April. I just didn't want I didn't want to be away from him, and I was nursing, and I said, well, okay, I asked the babysitter to just walk him around the block outside of places I was doing shows. You can identify it, like, oh, I was nuts. And at one point I was interviewing people inside the Théâtre Champs-Élysées, and I look out, it was a Chanel show, and I look out through these big glass this big glass window door situation, and I see Princess Caroline lifting my baby out of the stroller and comforting him. And I'm thinking, nobody would lift somebody else's baby up now, especially a princess, I guess. Anyway, I just kept interviewing because I was in the middle of an interview, and I just kind of looking, oh dear, what am I going to do? And
It's very hard to
just
keep
let
focused,
it roll on,
isn't it? Like, when your baby's anywhere in your vicinity, it's very hard to focus on anything else.
Murderous.
In fact, I got a flashback then, because I actually did a shoot for Bricks in this very studio, and I had to bring the baby. I managed to wing him being in the shoot, but it was because I had no babysitter. And the only person that was free was his uncle, but he's never been around any babies, and was like, oh, come with you and watch him on set. But he was just like, let's put him in the pictures. I didn't know.
No.
So I know what it's like when the baby just is there.
Yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky. I mean, I tried it a lot. Yeah. I some shoots every year I could take them with me, like the Prix de Diane, it's the Ascot of France, and I have all these pictures over the years of the kids and the cameraman, and even there's an old archival movie video that I'm nursing the baby in a corner. I pushed it as much as I could. I took the kids with me, but it was hard.
You have to. The only time I've ever left him, though, for a night so far, he's nearly 2, was for Milan Fashion Week. It was one night I went. So when I'm watching your documentary, I'm like, I'm tuned in to this lifestyle. I understand. And I've been wanting to talk to you for the series to more like mums in fashion, because I think there's a lot of them, and even more so now that people are able to work from their phones and work from home, and kind of.
I just find it.
So great. I just know that people will really relate to what you're saying, and when they get the chance to view your documentary as well, I just think it's a very special thing, because no one talks about the side of it. I think it's such a competitive industry and a go industry that you kind of have to like just front. Like, it's fine. I'll be there. I'll make it work. Yeah. But actually, you're just juggling all these hats. And emotions as well. It's hard. Like no matter how much fun I'm having on the interview, that even like right now I'm like having the time of my life. I'm like, oh, is he missing out on something? Should I be at home? It's that constant push and pull.
Exactly.
Career and motherhood.
Yeah, and it's seen as a kind of a demerit point that you've got this baggage, and I just wouldn't accept that. I was really pig-headed, and like you, one time Cartier asked me to come to Windsor for some polo thing, and I don't know what they were doing, but it's really fancy, and they were flying me, and I said, oh, okay, but my baby and my husband have to come. We spent the day looking at the Queen and Prince Charles and the polo match and all these movie stars and little kid.
And sometimes it can be scary to ask, because you think, why are they going to pay all this money when they could just fly out the next person that hasn't got it? But it's a good thing to point out, most of the time, if they've asked you, they will accommodate you. Yeah. If they want you, they want you. So there's that fear, like, oh, there's 100 girls that could do this job. But it's cool. The mums are in fashion. We're here. So we're talking about the mothers of fashion. And there was one that you spoke to frequently, which was the mum of Yves Saint Laurent.
Oh, I'm so happy that I found that clip of Yves Saint Laurent's mother. That I found just when I was finishing the documentary, and it was a bit of a holy grail thing, because I found footage, right? So what's in the documentary represents things I found. I've found things since, so I'll be making another movie. But Yves Saint Laurent's mother, oh, was she ever a trip? So elegant, so put together. And just, she was his number one fan, as she liked to say, number one fan.
But it was funny watching her, because even if your son is Yves Saint Laurent and is a grown man, it's still your baby. And the way she talks about him, it's just the same way I'm talking about my son. Like,
Absolutely.
the way you probably talk about your 3 children, the way, it's just like, it doesn't change.
No.
Did you find some sort of comfort in speaking to her, knowing that you had children at home?
Exactly. And also would find it was great to talk to moms. When models' moms would come, I always thought that was a really good idea. And I would really go to my way to sit around and chat with them, like Tyra Banks' mother. Good, you just stay here. That's really good. Yeah, don't let her come and do this by herself. You're doing the right thing.
And Tyra Banks' mum would come to everything with her.
Yeah.
Because in that famous or infamous interview with Naomi Campbell and Tyra, Naomi was saying that she was always a bit, not jealous, or maybe jealous. Naomi's mum couldn't travel with her. But Tyra was known for always having that support network. And they were young. I think you forget, when you see these glamorous images, you forget these women were super young.
She was younger than others, and that mother was so smart to do that.
Which kind of leads into something else I wanted to ask you. You don't have to answer this, but I did want to ask something. Something I was thinking a lot about recently, even before we planned this interview, was just looking at some of the photo shoots and going through old magazines, as I do. And then just thinking about like stories that we know from designers and models that have like struggled with addiction and things. Like a lot of these images that we see must have been some crazy things going on behind the scenes. And I'm sure you probably saw a lot of scandalous, maybe a little bit off-color things happening at the shows. I'm not going to ask you what they were or who they were because I don't. You didn't.
That's what's
so funny. I was going to ask you if you ever had to use your moral compass to leave certain things out or not. So you didn't see any of this stuff.
No, but it was going on, and so that's part of my research for the documentary. I felt I needed to find people and ask questions. And what I discovered, I interviewed Veronica Webb, Heather Stewart-White, Claudia Mason. Some models, if they were so valuable to their agency, they kept them very protected. I also interviewed Dawn Wolfe, who was everybody's agent, and released that recently. And she was like, talks about, it was rampant. It's never going to not be there, that there will be people doing things. And it was, for her, it was just really important to educate the girls to defend themselves. It was hidden. Didn't see a lot of it. In the archive, I'll see some in the background of a shot. I'll see, what's that guy got his arm around so and so? What was that about? I think that might connect to something I heard about that happened to her. But it was all very under the surface. Since people have told me that they would pick up that models were more comfortable in some situations than others. Oh, it's really nice to be at this photo shoot with you. I sort of compared to, now I have to go to this other one and less comfortable. But I guess that's how these things persist, because it's hidden.
Wow, because there is, of course, like another side to the industry.
Absolutely.
So I was intrigued as to if you would have witnessed that, but I guess from their perspective, maybe you were the media, so it was hush hush. And
at the shows and backstage, and even in a photo shoot, I mean, if there are cameras there, people are, as much as people were natural in front of us, very much spontaneous and natural with us, they certainly were being careful about how they behaved.
Right, makes sense.
Somebody told me, I won't say who, when she first got to Paris, she was with an agency, and they said, here's this apartment for the models, and there was one bed for the girls to sleep in, and at 11 o'clock at night or something, they came in and gave all the girls a lipstick to put lipstick on, and they were all supposed to go out to a club. And she got herself out of that situation as fast as she could. Yeah. And then did that lead to addictions? And,
because many people in fashion are very open about their addiction. I'm not going to sit here listing people. We all know who's been open and who hasn't. I'm not in the business of scandal.
Me neither.
Yeah, I was intrigued because you were very much there. One thing in the documentary that I thought, let me get some clarity around, because I can't remember now who was talking about it. I think it was a journalist, that you didn't cover many women designers. There was Catherine Hamnett that was covered a lot, and
because sexy, Sonia Rykiel, because there was always going to be bare boobs.
I was trying to peek at my notes then. I couldn't remember. Sonia Rykiel, yes, and Catherine Hamnett. But other than that, and Vivienne Westwood, of course,
absolutely, yeah. And I mean, sometimes we do a Comme des Garçons show with Martine Sidbon, Chantel Thomas. That was all Brazier, so I have archive of that. But we didn't do a lot. Fashion television. There was an eye on ratings. It was a show that had to please lots of different parts of the population. So there were fashion addicts who were watching it, and there were lots of families sitting down and watching it. And I'm not comfortable myself now, in retrospect, and even then, with how lascivious sometimes it was. Some of the shots, there's a way to shoot somebody on a runway, and there's a way to shoot somebody on the runway, and there are a lot of bums and bosoms being shot. And going back and doing the documentary, I had to come to terms with that and think a lot about that. And, it was a 2-year process of making the documentary. It involved tears of, how could I have been involved in something like that? It was soft porn in some cases, but at the same time, and so we were shooting a lot of women's shows, unless they were designing things that had, showing body parts. And, I had a lot of freedom, but at the same time, I had to do a little bit what my boss wanted. But what's interesting and what's vindicating about the legacy of fashion television, as much as it might have been a little blue TV, it was I underestimated to what point it was a liberatory gateway for people. And there was just a lot of other stuff going on besides serving that little niche situation. For one thing, it offered queer representation when there wasn't queer representation on TV, and people knew if they were watching for it. People have told me, I saw myself. I saw Alexander McQueen going down the runway, and I said, he's gay like me. I see myself. And getting in touch with all of these people, or these people finding me through my Instagram, that's been a sort of a research tool, has been extremely moving to understand. Like, people came out to their mother while they're watching the show. There's just story after story after story of how people felt represented at a time when they, I've connected with so many people growing up in a farm outside of Hamburg or outside of St. Louis, Missouri, or in these places where there wasn't access to any fashion or queer culture, and to see it on TV was incredibly liberating for people. So that was a good thing. Yeah,
Definitely.
And not just queer politics, but just people feeling that they could be different and express themselves, and there was a great freedom expressed in many ways. You think of the fashion of Gautier and just the attitude that people projected. People sat at home and felt, I'm going to try to be me tomorrow at high school. I mean, I've been interviewing these people now, and they say, I was an isolated kid. I was the only Asian kid in my class. My parents moved from Hong Kong to open the restaurant in this small town in Michigan. And I watched the show, and then I would dress up on Monday, and I carved out an identity for myself. So it had a lot of layers.
Yeah, I can imagine it was highly influential to these people. And you were saying about
hidden impacts, which is cool.
There were parts of it that maybe you weren't so proud of, and you had to cater to a certain audience, which is just sort of like the general people that don't really care about fashion. They want to be entertained. And there is this cast of characters in the fashion world who are very out there and entertaining. I'm sure any person that doesn't have a clue about fashion would watch Andre Leon Talley talk and be, who is this guy? Or, Vivienne Westwood. There's a lot of quirky people in fashion, even if you are watching just to be like, I want to see some freaks and laugh at them. But kind of full circle, my train of thought in your documentary is because there's that clip of Vivienne Westwood saying, without freaks, nothing would happen, nothing would develop. And the flip side of that is looking at these sort of fashion freaks actually inspired a lot of people. So
it really did.
There's two sides of the coin.
It really did.
It's quite beautiful, actually.
It really is. And that's why I have enjoyed this process of rediscovering the archive, and it makes me feel very heartened to think that I helped people access Vivienne saying that, that without freaks, nothing would develop, nothing would happen.
It's so true. She made a point. When you've grown up in a big city, you kind of get spoiled. So I couldn't even imagine just growing up somewhere that just farms and trees and no fashion whatsoever, and then seeing that and being like, wow, the excitement must have been
it's powerful.
Yeah,
it's really powerful and
life-changing.
Yeah. And then these people, because I'm researching now, I'm interviewing lots of people, and the people watched the show laser focus and registered all the different kinds of jobs you could do in fashion, the names of everybody, it just absorbed. And a lot of these people that I'm talking about went on to have really big careers in fashion, but from nowhere, and made their way to New York or Hamburg or Paris or wherever it might be, and had enough of a sense of how to do things because they picked up that cultural capital from watching fashion television. And they've gone on to have amazing careers. There's Jason Duzansky is one of these people who's the creative director who worked with Stephen Meisel for years, but who did the Linda and Stephen book. Well, he grew up on fashion television, and for him, it's just seminal. And James Bomer, who recently stepped down from being the global artistic director of Shiseido, was, in the person I spoke about in St. Louis, Missouri. Just the show was just a semi-religious experience, and also an incredible experience of feeling seen. Yeah.
People were a little bit surprised that fashion television came out of Canada because it's not a fashion capital. Which, when I heard that, I was kind of like, yeah, but a lot of supermodels are Canadian. Also, like Linda's Canadian that you mentioned. Shalom Harlow was Canadian. Yeah. Which made me want to ask.
Yasmin,
the Canadian queen. Yasmin,
the queen, the top.
Amazing. Top. But I say that to say there's a lot of Canadian supermodels. So I wanted to ask you, what was the fashion scene like in Canada at that time?
No.
Non-existent?
Cheap TV.
Yeah.
And this channel that was this upstart channel called City TV. We only had 3 or 4 channels in Canada, and they got a license. It was a big thing. Canada opened up on an extra license for this channel. And they didn't have a lot of money, and there was a very forward-thinking, innovative person who was running this called Moses Neimer. And they had this idea to put, I'm going way backwards here, but to put blue movies on TV on Friday nights. And they sort of edited them. A friend of mine worked on that show. It was her first job as an editor, and her job was to edit out all the men's body parts of the blue movies on Friday night.
You couldn't write it, could you?
I know. Anyway, she told me that while I was doing my research. She's like, oh my God. Anyway, different times. So this is in the 80s, and it was obviously very new, and they got attention for the channel. So they built it up, and then they started Much Music, so the early Canadian music video channel. So they realized, fashion, if we got fashion videos, we can make some cheap TV doing fashion's fun. And it's true, I was at CBC at a different channel at that time, and I had done a story about Toronto fashion, and I was moving to Paris, and a friend of mine said, you should do some stories for fashion television. It's getting off the ground and so on. And so when I first got there, my principal mission was to get videos from the designers, from the design houses. And I would, terrible French, phoning them up, just and I quickly realized there was no way they were giving videos. It's just maybe I got 1 or 2, but it was just a completely different attitude. First of all, a lot of houses weren't filming the videos, filming the shows. And then if they did film the shows, they were super protective of it. There's a whole different attitude to dissemination, to video. I mean, to think that 10 years later, there were so many cameras and things were being sent all around the world to be knocked off really fast. They weren't able to stop that from happening, but they were really afraid of it in the mid 80s. And so I was like, you can't have the videos. So I started phoning and realized, no, we're gonna have to shoot the shows. And so with their limited budget, they found a way to finance shooting the shows with an NTSC camera. And I engaged a fantastic cinematographer from Canada who, so that's why fashion television looks so great. His name is John Cressy, and we hit the shows. So it was kind of an accident. It was none of it, nobody was, we were not a fashion capital in any way.
So it was an accident that the channel just happened, and then it's just a coincidence that 3 of the top models in the world just happened to also be Canadian.
And then, but what's weirder, Fashion File is also from Toronto. So 3 or 4 years later, CBC said, well, if they're doing it, we should do it too. Yeah. And so the 2 big shows from globally covering fashion in a fun way, we're both from Toronto.
There's none of the main shows happen there. Nothing happens there, but they're just they monopolize documenting it.
That's the Canadian identity. We're next to America and we observe, and so that's kind of what we do.
So going kind of back to the beginning, you were saying you weren't particularly interested in fashion when you started this. It was just a big accident. I mean, you look fabulous today. Did you start to take more notice of putting outfits together, or did you just not care? Because you look great today.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, there may be something sunk in, but no, I didn't have money. And, people in that game, it was, sure, probably it did a bit, but I'm no fashion plate, that's for sure.
My only reference for this is like films when it's like there's someone who's not interested in fashion and gets dropped into the world, and then gradually it's like, oh, a Chanel bag, or just like the proportions of the outfit change a little bit, you absorb. Maybe. So I was interested if you had some sort of style journey on this.
Maybe.
And I feel like from the conversation I can tell, but do you have a much bigger interest in fashion now than you did before, or is it just more of like looking back at the archives that you were a part of and sort of piecing it together?
I absolutely did not stay up to date. I left in 98 and I couldn't give a darn about it. I became a school teacher, didn't think about fashion at all. And somebody asked me to appear on a program and talk about fashion television a few years ago. And I said, no. I was absolutely sure I had absolutely nothing to say and was completely out of touch with fashion. And she finally, after 6 months, I agreed to be on the show. It was during COVID, so it was a Zoom with some people in Chicago. And I did it and immediately understood, oh my gosh, I have a lot to say.
Yeah.
And then I spent 2 years doing a master's and getting myself up to date and getting on Instagram and following people. Who wears this person? Where's that person? And talking to people and having my memories come back. So yes, but I'm no expert. I still couldn't tell you what's in style.
Well, what's in style is subjective anyway. So, but it's just funny that you're still quite like, so casual about it. And I would consider you an expert.
I haven't changed much because my interest in fashion is still sociological. I actually find what's happening now fascinating. And I am trying to keep up with it and keep in touch with it. I'm looking with a bit of skepticism about diversity and about plus sizes and all of the things that the people are saying they're honoring. I'm thinking a lot about embodiment. I guess I thought a lot about embodiment then, and I still think a lot about embodiment. And I think fashion tells us a lot about it. It's not superficial. It's not just something fun and airy and people who are adorning themselves. They're saying something when they're adorning themselves. We're communicating all the time with fashion. I find it actually fascinating.
Do you know what? I should have asked you that at the start because I'm so hooked into this. I'm going to have to do another interview next time you're in London because now I have about 25 more questions. Yeah, it's very interesting. And lastly, I know I said it was the last thing, but this is the real last thing. Did I hear you mention at some point in this interview that there's another documentary in the works?
Yeah, I have to. I've found lots more material. I just have so much more material with models because every time a model would hit, I would do a feature about her. Mm-hmm. So I couldn't put it all in the documentary at all. And I was doing things that were more thematic. I want to have fun with that.
Yeah.
And I've got a lot of features that I did about photographers that most of which I couldn't find while I was working on the movie, and I have since found. And so I'm going to have some fun.
You're going to have to because even just the pieces that I've seen, I know you've got some good stuff. I can't even imagine the things that you've got in your archive that people haven't seen.
Yeah, and I try not to put what's in the film or either film on my Instagram. So imagine how much there is.
Yeah. So where can people see your film?
Well, invite me over. Get a room with it, and I'll bring a projector. It's a bootleg film.
Right.
And I'm allowed to show it when I'm there. And so I've shown it in Central St. Martin's and Parsons Paris and the Art Institute of Chicago School of Fashion and an underground club in Berlin. And so if there's a space, an art space, I can show it. And let's do this.
You heard the woman. I wasn't just being like complimentary. It's honestly up there with like any of my favorite fashion documentaries that I've watched. I've watched it twice already since you sent me the link because it's just so good.
Thanks.
So I really think you need to listen to what Nan just said and try and facilitate some screenings because you need to see this. And I'm so happy there's going to be another one.
That's great.
I can't wait. Thank you so much for sitting down with me.
Oh, it's great.
It's been a pleasure. And we definitely will do it again next time you're back because the sociology of fashion, how smart do I sound when I say that? Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you.
I'm almost home after interviewing Nan. I just feel so happy that I was able to help her share her story because a big part of Nan's story is like putting her face back in the picture because obviously she was the invisible woman. She's contributed so much to fashion, but she's kind of slipped under the radar. But she did a lot of the work, and some of these iconic, famous interviews were all her and her husband. So now that she's ready to put herself back into the narrative and share her stories and share what it was like. I'm just so happy that she wanted me to be a part of it. And once again, I just feel so inspired after talking to her. So I really hope you all enjoyed that conversation. I'm going to go and... So I'm carrying this big bag because I had some PR waiting for me at the Brexit office. But yeah, I'm going to go and feed the baby. See you next week.